Today I wanted to talk about wrist pain on one side of your wrist, and it's called, for all of you, it's called the ulnar side of your wrist, okay? So it's the little finger side of your wrist. And your ulnar bone is this bone right here, and your radius is this bone right here, okay? And they work very closely together, and of course I have an anatomy picture because I'm a total anatomy geek and I love to show pictures, and I just love to pick up this big huge book that weighs about 1,000 pounds. But here you can see a little bit better. This is where my phone went bad last time and it collapsed. So those are the two bones in the forearm. This is the radius and then this is the ulna, okay? So little finger and this is your thumb over here, all right? So a lot of time people will get pain on that ulnar side of their wrist, the little finger side of their wrist. And it can happen for a number of different reasons. It can happen from anatomical reasons. It can happen from technique reasons. And then the question is, what do you do about it? So this was actually one of the problems that I had. So I'll talk about that a little bit later when I was having all of my issues before. But here's another little picture, which is a little bit easier to see. This is my son's wrist. When he broke his, you can sort of see, this is a fracture line right there. He broke his scaphoid. So all these little extra lines are actually growth plates. So they occur in kids, and that's actually what allows us to grow. We talked about that in our class this week. We start out with more bones than we actually end up with because of the growth plates actually fuse. But on this side, this is the ulnar side of the wrist. And there's something very important that lives in this little triangle here. This little triangle right in here. It's called your TFCC, all right? And it's a complex of different structures, and it can get cranky, all right? The other reason why it can get cranky is sometimes this bone genetically, anatomically on people is a little bit too long. So you can see if you take this bone and you squish it up a little bit higher, it squishes into these little tiny bones in your wrist, all right? And then what happens is that when you palm up, palm down, or go back and forth like you're waving, all right, that little bone here smashes into the tiny little bones in your wrist, okay? And then you can get pain. So that's an anatomical variance. People are born with that. It's called the positive ulnar variance, all right? The other thing that happens is when we turn our palm down, that ulna automatically migrates down further into the hand area. So it makes this space smaller, okay? And when it makes this space smaller, if you've got irritation down in through here, it can make things a little bit crankier. So just some fun facts. What you have to realize about this little bone is it only takes 20% of the force when we're doing activities. This big guy over here is 80%. So if there is something off and out of alignment down in through here, it changes the force load, all right? And then the ulna ends up taking more force and can cause problems, all right? So it's important to kind of have a basic understanding of what's going on down and through here. So when you've got pain on that other side, a lot of times it can be caused by the way you're at your instrument. I recently just had a patient, a clarinetist, who was having ulnar sided wrist pain on that little side of her finger and through here. And it had to do everything with how she was actually rotating back and forth. So she would be playing, and she would have to go up to certain keys, and what she would do is she'd come up and then she'd come down, and she'd actually stay down into a position. She wouldn't actually move in and out of the position that she needed to. So all we did is we just tweaked her technique just a little bit so that she was more aware of how she was working back and forth at her instrument, and her wrist pain, she came back the following week and her wrist pain was gone, all right? So that was huge. I mean, just one little thing, one little tweak of her technique, and her wrist pain was gone. And she wouldn't have ever probably realized this because why would she? This is just the way she's plays. But sometimes you just need that extra set of eyes to be like, okay, what is happening? What is going on? The other thing too is that she was prone to having an extra long ulna. So it had been confirmed by an x-ray. So she had that ulnar positive variance. So she had an extra long ulna. So that with over time would have really created problems. She's young now. If she continued to play and continued to do that, she would have really irritated that. And that triangular fibrocartilage in there, that little complex, of gunk that's right down and through here can wear down and get torn, all right? And when it gets torn, it creates problems. I had a tear in mine years ago. Part of mine was because I was using a mouse and I was doing a lot of this back and forth, okay? So that's one thing that you want to watch out for. Plus all of my playing in the funky positions that I was in also contributed to my TFCC tear. So they take a really, really long time to heal. They take a really long time to heal, and they can cause a lot of problems. And surgery is not always a great option. The surgeons will tell you, oh, let's try not to do it in general, at least the surgeons that I've worked with. So I never had surgery. I just rested it in terms of wearing a splint and getting out of the positions that were bothering it, that I knew were bothering it at the time, because nobody ever told me what positions I should avoid back then. I just sort of figured it out and was like, okay, I'm going to immobilize it and see what happens, because that was way before I became a therapist. Now I know certain things that I would avoid. So if you're playing, you want to be careful of that. So you want to just watch how much, if you're getting pain on this side, just think about what positions you're putting your forearm in. This is really common with percussionists as well. A lot of percussionists will do this on and off rather than a lot more coming from the elbow. So when you can, you want to move the smaller motions up to a bigger joint when you can. You can't always do that as a musician, but when you can, you want to move it up to a larger joint, because that larger joint can take more force than the little joint down here. So if you're doing a lot of this, that can irritate in through here as well. Sometimes people, when they are bowing, they tweak their arm a little bit in their wrist, and they'll put their hand in a funky position over time. That will create issues as well, and the tension on that side. So that's one of the big common things of pain in the wrist area and things to do about it. So you also want to watch what you're doing outside of your instrument too, because like I said, I was not only playing, but I was also using a mouse, and I was using a mouse this way, okay? Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So you want to really back and forth this way, all right? And then watch if you're cooking a lot or if you're stirring, you don't want to be doing this, all right? That's one thing. So if you're getting wrist pain, you want to avoid that kind of motion. You want to do it more in this position, okay? So a lot of this is just kind of using joint protection principles, and I can go over a lot of different joint protection principles at some point in time too. But it's about using our joints in a better way. We have a tendency just to run through life and not think about how we're using our body. And our joints have certain places that make them happy and certain places that make them unhappy if you stay in those places for a long time. So I think I've talked about how, for me, I tend to lift my book, my anatomy book, this way. Okay, I've done that for years and years and years and years and years. It's really bad for you, all right? It's really bad for you. You need to just pick up the book with both hands and bring it in close to your body, because otherwise you're really pushing too much pressure on your thumb. Hey, Bruce, how are you? I'm talking about wrist pain today on the little finger side, and I'm almost done, so hopefully you can go back and watch the replay of all of this if you get a chance. But we're just talking about different techniques to kind of avoid, and patients that I've had before with pain on that side. The other thing is guitarists too, actually, on that right side can get, if they're doing a lot of strumming this way, can get wrist pain as well. So over here in that area. So you just want to watch and, always think you don't have to run out and get an x-ray and see if your ulna is too long. That's one of those things that, you kind of wait and see what happens. This patient that I had been having pain for a while, and then had an issue years before, so that's why she ended up with that x-ray to confirm it. But it does help to know, but it's not something that you don't need to go radiate yourself to figure that out. There's ways to fix things, and there's always ways to tweak your technique so that you can get rid of that, because that was just an amazing thing for her. All we did was that one little change at her instrument, and then her pain was gone, which was great. And the problem is that if you let it go for too long, then what happens is that the muscles in your forearm overwork, and then they get cranky and they get spasmed, and then you have to work on those as well. So it's best if you can kind of nip things in the butt quickly, have somebody look at your technique as quickly as you can if you've got stuff going on.